Hello and welcome back to Fundamentals in Ecology. I am Umesh Srinivasan and I am at the Center for Ecological Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science. Today, what we will be talking about is the Anthropocene and an introduction to the Anthropocene. The term Anthropocene comes from the recognition of the impacts that human beings are having on the planet and the planetary systems as a whole, including biodiversity, and the recognition of the fact that those impacts have been very intense, very severe, very widespread, very far reaching. And so some people use the term the Anthropocene to describe the current era or epoch we are living through, to just recognizing that human beings, we as humanity, have had such huge impacts on biodiversity and on ecosystems. The term Anthropocene comes from the word anthropos, which is Greek for human, and so that's why Anthropocene, like you have the Holocene, the Miocene, the Eocene, the Anthropocene. This is a map that's showing how forests across the world are highly disturbed. So you've got a forest landscape integrity index, and the various forests in the world are color coded to show whether forest landscape integrity is high or whether it's low, and that ranges from 0 to 10. And apart from the Amazon basin and parts of boreal forests at higher latitudes, tropical forest landscape integrity is quite low. And so most forests are disturbed. Most forests have had or continue to have human impacts affecting them. And this is true for almost every ecosystem that you can think of, every habitat that you can think of. Human beings have had an impact on those habitats, whether it be marine coral reefs or whether it be mangrove forest or grasslands. Human beings have had very large impacts on almost all ecosystems. Today, human structures outweigh biomass. So if you take all the animals in the world, put together and weigh them, the estimate of that total weight, the total biomass of animals would be about 4 gigatons. Plastic, actually today, the amount of plastic we have produced weighs twice as much as the total biomass of animals on the earth. So plastics weigh 8 gigatons. Buildings and infrastructure, whatever we built with cement and concrete and other building infrastructure, is actually today outweighs the total biomass of vegetation on the earth. So biomass of vegetation is about 900 gigatons, whereas our building and infrastructure mass is 1,100 gigatons. So these are actually very, very significant impacts that human beings have had on earth. In the absence of us, there would be no plastics. In the absence of us, there would be no industrial scale infrastructure like we're seeing in terms of buildings and so on. So to have a situation where actually what we have created outweighs what is in the natural world is actually a very, very large impact. And we are living through the 6th ever mass extinction in Earth's history. There have been 5 mass extinctions in the past. Of course, these are the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic and the Cretaceous. And the loss of species in each of these mass extinction events was about 75% to 90%. Yeah, 75 to 95%. And the causes of these mass extinctions were things like the impact of asteroids on the planet, and of course the most dramatic one to our minds is the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago because of an asteroid that hits the Yucatan Peninsula, which is in Mexico. And our ongoing 6th biodiversity crisis is one that we have caused all on our own through things like climate change and habitat loss and so on. We'll see what are the main, what are called global change drivers in causing biodiversity declines. So we are actually living through the sixth ever mass extinction in the history of life on planet Earth. Life on planet Earth is 3.8 billion years old, and over those 3.8 billion years, there have been only 6 mass extinctions, and one is going on right now. The biodiversity crisis that we're seeing is represented in this graphic, where you've got the background extinction rate, some background extinction rate over time. And that background extinction rate comes from the fossil record. We know that of all the species that have ever existed on Earth, 99% of those species have gone extinct. Only 1% of species that have existed on Earth are actually present on Earth right now. And those species have some normal, some natural extinction rate. Species arise and then go extinct at some baseline or background extinction rate. Today what we're seeing, whether it comes to mammals or birds or vertebrates or other fish, the extinction rates of species over the last half a century have climbed to what some people say. So for example, cumulative extinctions of all mammals, 1.4% of those that have been evaluated for risk of extinction have actually gone extinct. Yeah. Other people say perhaps that rate of extinction is higher than we think it is. Maybe it's closer to 2.5% of mammals that have gone extinct. But the estimates vary from study to study, but it's estimated that we are losing species today at 100 to 1,000 times the background extinction rate, which is much higher than the background extinction rate, and therefore definitely qualifies as a mass extinction. Vertebrate populations have collapsed. These are wild vertebrate populations from across the world, assessed from across the world, and wild vertebrate populations have actually collapsed by about 70% since 1970. For a lot of studies, 1970 is the baseline where people look at what the population sizes of these mammals, these wild mammals were, vertebrates were in 1970, and relative to that, how have populations fallen? And so one is just a baseline there. You're asking by what percentage have populations collapsed, and it's about 70%. Those populations today are 70% smaller than they were in 1970. And that's illustrated by this. If you took all mammal biomass on Earth, then we and our livestock represents 96% of the mammal biomass on Earth. So 96% of the total weight of mammals on Earth is contributed to by our livestock and us. Only 4% of mammal biomass is wild mammals. And so we have really changed the Earth to quite drastic effects. Just like mammal biomass has declined and vertebrates have declined, invertebrates have also declined. Again, you see the decline in lepidopterans, which is moths and butterflies, over the years. You see the decline in all these other invertebrates over the years to about 70%. And on the right, what you're seeing is biomass of insects caught in traps in terms of number of grams of insects or grams of arthropods per day. So if you put out a trap for a day, how many grams of arthropods do you get? And that is measured in the past, which is here, across April, May, June, July, August, September, October and November. These are data from Europe, and you can see that the peak, this is the past. You can see that the peak in the past was about 20 grams per day during the peak of summer. That has dropped to about 2 grams a day now. So the collapse of invertebrate populations has also been very drastic. So now what we're dealing with now is rarity. We're dealing with now species becoming rare, but they're not all becoming rare in the same way. There are different ways in which species are becoming rare. So if you were to classify how rare a species is and why is it rare, you can ask, is the species a habitat specialist? you can ask if the local abundance or the density of the population at a particular point is high or low, and you can ask about the geographical range of the species. So if a species, for example, is a generalist, has high densities and a large geographical range, then that species is not rare. But a species that is a generalist has a low local densities, that is rarity type 1. And so you have various types of rarity depending upon that combination of habitat specialization, local abundance and local range. And the most severe form of rarity is rarity number 6, where you are a specialist, the species is a specialist, its geographical range is small and its local abundance is low. And those are species like what you see here on the left, the species called the Bugun leochicla, found only in 2 square kilometers with a population size of about 20 individuals, and it is a specialist because it uses ravines or the watercourses as its habitat. So it's found only in about 2 square kilometers there. 20 individuals that use these features, they would not be found using features like this. They are found using, it's a specialist species. So this is related to the concept of demographic and environmental stochasticity, right? The larger the geographical range that you have, the lower the chances that any one severe environmental event like a snowstorm would cause the extinction of the species, because it's a large geographical range. An extreme event could be restricted to only one part of the geographical range, and therefore all the other populations, the other parts of the geographical range are not affected by that extreme event. The population size being small is related to demographic stochasticity, where random changes in birth rates and death rates can actually cause the species to drop below minimum viable population size and then go extinct. So if you have a small population that is geographically restricted, that population is exposed to both demographic stochasticity and environmental stochasticity, and that's why it's the worst form of rarity. This rarity is being caused by global change drivers, what we call global change drivers. So the globe is changing, and there are reasons why the globe is changing. Overwhelmingly, those reasons are because of what we do to the earth. Some of these global change drivers are habitat loss and the degradation of habitats, climate change, overexploitation in terms of taking out unsustainable numbers of individuals of populations from the environment, like from fishing and from hunting. And the invasive species, we have facilitated the spread of species from one part of the world to the other, where they have become invasive, which means that they have established themselves and taken over certain ecosystems or certain habitats with very, very large consequences for biodiversity in those areas. And then you have joint effects or interactive effects, where habitat fragmentation and climate change can both act together to affect a species or to affect a population. So let's look at some of these global change drivers, starting with habitat fragmentation. This is a patch of habitat, of rainforest habitat in Brazil. So what you've got is this patch of habitat that has been left intact, but it's surrounded by land that is used for, let's say, growing crops or for feeding cattle, growing grass to feed cattle, pasture land. So what you have is a fragment, a habitat fragment, that then gets embedded within a larger, what's called a matrix. So you have fragments and a matrix surrounding those fragments. And fragmentation does have very important consequences for biodiversity. And the reason why fragmentation has consequences for biodiversity is what we'll get into soon. But if you look at fragments across the world, this is tropical forest fragments across the world, be it in Latin America or in Africa or in Asia and Northern Australia. Most fragments are small. So if you count the number of fragments that have a certain size, that's the number of fragments that have a certain size in hectares. A very large number of small fragments, and as fragment size increases, the number of fragments decreases. So what you've got across the world in tropical forest is forests being fragmented such that you have very small patches of large forest, but a lot of patches of small forest, a lot of patches of smaller isolated, more isolated forest. And the impacts that fragmentation has on biodiversity come from these things, comes from area reduction. When fragments become smaller, they're able to sustain smaller populations. And because they're able to sustain smaller populations, and smaller populations might not be beyond the minimum viable population size required for persistence, species might go extinct from fragments. It comes from isolation, where there's the lack of connectivity between two fragments. So if two fragments were actually connected through a forest corridor, then one fragment might gain species because species disperse from one fragment to the other, or species disperse from larger patches of fragments to smaller patches of fragments. But isolation causes a loss of that connectivity. You have edge effects, where you can see that there is a very sharp edge between the fragment and the surrounding matrix, and that leads to problems with fragmentation. And then you have indirect effects, and we'll talk about that. Just look at area, right? Patch size and species richness. This is from the Taita Hills in East Africa, where you've got area on the x-axis on a log scale. So you've got area in hectares of a particular fragment on the log scale, and you've got the number of species that is present in that forest on the y-axis. And you can see clearly, as area increases in these forest fragments here, as area increases, the number of species also increases. And so the fact that larger fragments support greater number of species is well established now. You also these fragmentation also has impacts on species interactions. What you're seeing on the top right is what's called a mixed species bird flock. This is a set of multiple species that feeds and moves together. They in fact are very, very tightly associated with each other. They wake up in the morning, find each other, go out and feed, and in fact they defend joint territories. This mixed species flock in the Amazon will actually defend its territory jointly. All of those species will be involved in territory defense. What you've got here in the primary forest are multiple species represented by these circles or nodes in this network, and how connected are these species in terms of their associations with each other, represented by these lines, which are called edges. Yeah, and so you've got species that are the sizes of the nodes is dependent on how important they are to the cohesion of the flock. And you can see that the large species, which are very, very important here, that species which is central to the flock, has very strong connections with other species in the mixed species flock. So species vary in their importance to flock. But if you take that primary forest and you degrade it, and it's that big, and then you convert that into a much smaller fragment of just 10 hectares, you start to see the loss of interactions between species. So that could be because species themselves are being lost, or because other things could be happening here which is causing the loss of association between species. So it's not just the number of species that are being lost, it's also that associations between species that are very important for the survival of these species. For example, in these mixed species bird flocks, they confer, the individuals benefit from having lower risk of predation and a higher food finding efficiency. And so if those interactions are really crucial for the survival of these species, and those are lost in smaller fragments, then that might over time finally lead to the loss of species, because they actually go locally extinct in these small fragments. Edge effects are also important, and edges are increasing worldwide. What is this? This is a map of forests from across the world that is color coded based on distance from an edge. So it's color coded based on, if you went to a patch of forest, if you're looking at this from a satellite, and you zeroed in on a patch of forest, you can ask how far away is that from another habitat, how far away is that from, let's say, agricultural land or pasture land. So that's an edge between forest and non-forest. And that edge could be very close by, you could be at the edge 0 meters from the edge, or you could be more than 1 kilometer from the edge. So if you're more than 1 kilometer from the edge, it's color coded in it's blue. If you are very, very close to an edge, you're in red, and there's a sliding scale of colors showing how far you are from the edge. Pretty much the only places where you're more than 1 kilometer away from an edge are the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, Southeast Asia, and the Russian Far East. Most other forest is less than 1 kilometer from an edge, and a lot of forest is actually very, very close to an edge. So what does the edge do? The edges are actually hotter, drier, they're windier, they're prone to fire because they're hotter and drier, and they promote the establishment of invasive species. What you're seeing here on the x-axis is distance from forest edge, and on the y-axis the percentage of trees that are either standing, they're dead but they're standing, or they've fallen and they're damaged. And less than 60 meters from the edge, actually 10 to 15% of trees are standing dead, about 10% of trees are dead but still standing, and a little less than 15% of trees have fallen and are damaged. But if you go more than 500 meters away from the edge, so you're going 500 meters into forest, the mortality of trees reduces very, very sharply. So all of these things, fire, desiccation, invasive species, actually contribute to the loss of individuals in the species at the edge compared to interior parts of the fragment. This is an indirect effect in that fragmentation encourages fragmentation, such that if you build, let's say, a highway through a forest land, through a forest patch, that highway then encourages people to come and settle on that highway. The shops will open, communities will form, and then that then results in the addition of these secondary roads in a fishbone kind of pattern, where earlier you had one road creating two large fragments on either side of it. Now, because of these auxiliary secondary roads, you're creating tinier fragments in that landscape. So fragmentation actually encourages fragmentation. Let's talk a bit about overexploitation. Overexploitation is the removal of individuals from natural habitats, from natural populations at rates which are higher than can be sustained. A good example of this is fisheries, and fishing pressure in the last 50 years or so has actually increased 18-fold. In 1970, the intensity of fishing was 18 times less than it is now, and you can see that on the top left. You've got that boat, a single boat carrying massive amounts of fish. So we actually increased fishing pressure by 18-fold, and that massive fishing pressure has caused natural populations to decline. So this is sharks and rays in various oceans, the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Pacific Ocean, depending on the traits, what kind of habitat, the temperate sharks or tropical sharks, small, medium, large body size sharks, what is the generation time, what is some of these demographic parameters of these sharks. You can see that pretty much in all of these oceans, regardless of traits, shark populations have declined quite drastically. Tropical sharks you're seeing here actually have almost come down to decline to populations that are very, very close to minimum viable, perhaps at this point even now even less than minimum viable populations. See the same thing with hunting. This is hunting in the Amazon basin, comparing 4 sites: a site that is not hunted, a site that is lightly hunted, a site that is moderately hunted, and a site that is heavily hunted. And this hunting is for large mammals that are integral to seed dispersal. So for monkeys feed on fruit and then disperse the seeds as they move through the forest to new locations where they can germinate, and then they can lead to regeneration of forest. What you have on the x-axis is body mass. What you have on the x-axis is population body mass density. So you can see that in the non-hunted sites, it's the larger species on this end of this body mass spectrum that are contributing a lot to the overall body mass of this community, right? as you start hunting, and hunting targets large animals, you start seeing the biomass contribution of large animals start to come down. So light hunting causes some little reduction in the biomass of large animals. Moderate hunting causes a further reduction in the biomass of these large animals. Biomass contributed to by large animals, until when you get to severely hunted sites, large mammals are contributing very less to the overall percentage of biomass in this community. And because these large mammals are so important for seed dispersal, what you get is a situation where, and this is projected, this is people have predicted that this is what will happen if we lose these large mammals. So for example, if you lose these two species of monkey, the howler monkey and the spider monkey, then the biomass of Amazonian trees can be lost up to 2 to 4% of the biomass of Amazonian trees could be lost, because that regeneration is not happening. But if you lose also, apart from these monkeys, you also lose the tapir, which is a large mammal that is involved in seed dispersal. You could lose even up to about 25% of the biomass of the Amazon in terms of trees, 25% of the tree biomass in the Amazon. So hunting can have very, very important ecosystem level impacts as well, because the roles that these species are playing in terms of, say, seed dispersers or predators or herbivores or pollinators could then be lost, leading to further consequences for the functioning of that ecosystem. So that was an introduction to some global change drivers, habitat fragmentation, overexploitation. We will talk next time about the impacts that climate change is having on biodiversity, the ways in which climate change is affecting biodiversity. So thank you for joining today, and see you next time.